reduced from July this year if medical facilities are passed on benefits from the proposed VAT exemptions on ventilators, decongestants, supplements and plastic syringes as contained in the draft Finance Bill 2021. According to John Kuria, a partner at Kody Africa LLP, the move is aimed at lowering the cost of healthcare. However, the cost of basic commodities such as bread and milk formula is likely to go up if proposals to introduce VAT on those products sail through. So earlier on, I had a conversation with Kuria about how the tax proposals in the draft Finance Bill 2021 are likely to impact on businesses and individuals, and this is how the conversation went. Some of the proposals that have been captured in the Finance Bill 2021 are likely to aim at two outcomes: widening the tax base and generating additional tax revenue. To help us unpack this particular issue when it comes to matters finances and the budget is none other than John Kuria, a tax and accounting expert and a partner at Kody Africa Limited Liability Partnership. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, Regina.
Let's start us off. We have a proposed budget of 3.63 trillion shillings for the finance year 2021-2022. The taxman carry is to collect revenue of 1.8 trillion shillings, leaving a deficit of around 2 trillion thereabout. If you're given an opportunity to become the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary or Kuria attorney in this time, what would you do to actually plug this particular deficit?
All right. Maybe just to give you a bit of background, I think recently it was reported that KRA had actually missed their targets. And I think it's because of this. We've just come out of a rough patch because of COVID. So if I was given an opportunity, I guess what I would probably do is to, first of all, go back to the measures that had been installed pre-COVID, where the government had given tax incentives, lowered tax bands, and probably even ensured that those lasted for a bit longer, so as to allow a recovery period. So we saw these measures coming in during the COVID period. However, the way I feel is that they should have been extended a little bit longer after COVID, so that's to give businesses a chance to recover and to also be able to, catch up with the losses that they had made. Now, 2 trillion is a big, staggering amount. Now, again, when you look at the economy generally, you see there are a lot of loopholes that are created by issues around corruption, over expenditure, which is also interesting that some ministries also return back money that they have not spent. So probably prioritizing is what I would focus on. Prioritize, try and close those loopholes. I know corruption is not a Ministry of Finance, docket. It's a nationwide docket. It's something that should be, dealt with from a national point of view. But I think those are the key areas that I would focus on. And then probably also look for taxes that would be all-inclusive without hurting the common mwananchi, so that then the tax net can be widened and made more inclusive, so that more can contribute towards this ever shrinking pot of tax. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that overview. Now, the 2021-2022 budget cycle is likely to include a number of tax amendments. Now, under this, with that in mind, then, where should we expect changes?
Yeah, so the changes mainly around VAT. We've also seen in VAT, interesting that bread might become more expensive just when it's becoming more affordable and more available to the common household. It's probably the main breakfast in most households. So there will be a change around that. By exempting VAT on bread, it might make it more expensive, because then that means that bread manufacturers cannot be able to deduct the input tax. They cannot claim the input tax that goes into the manufacture of bread. Changes around income tax as well. Something also interesting around NSSF. Now you can be able to claim some relief, so which is a good thing, and might also help incentivize people to contribute more towards NSSF. Yeah, so those are some of the key highlights or key areas that we've seen. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned something about the issue of VAT. Now, the bill pushes for an increase of 16% VAT on essential goods. We're talking about issues of bread, infant milk, motorcycles, imported jewelry, and nicotine pouches. What then will this mean to the consumer?
Yeah, so just like I've alluded, like for bread, milk, it will mean that the moment you remove or you actually make them exempt, some of these products, it increases the cost, because what then happens is that the manufacturer of these products cannot claim the input on those products, and therefore making them more expensive to the common mwananchi. Now, milk is milk, especially and milk products, when they become more expensive, it then means that we have the access to milk and milk products then becomes more expensive. Bread, the same. Imported jewelry, again, also will become quite expensive. And some of these industries, you find that a lot of the products that are used, like milk and milk products, you find some we depend to some extent on importation, so which makes it even more expensive in the longer run. Yeah.
Now, are you saying we're going back to hard times? Should Wanjiko then now brace for tougher times ahead?
Yes, I think so. I think so because, like I explained, would have expected that the measures that had been introduced earlier that allowed a reduction of corporation tax from 30% to 25%, the widening of the tax bands and reduction of income tax for individuals to 25%. I would have expected that such measures would have lasted a bit longer. So yes, I do expect that it's going to become more expensive for Wanjiko in the coming year also. Yeah.
From where you sit, were there other options? Because over the last few years, we've been seeing that syntax, there were some commodities that were paying the price of actually funding or rather financing the budget, with the taxation.
I think the idea would have been to try and accommodate more people into the tax band. There was an attempt to bring the common businesses into the tax threshold by introducing a tax that was payable on renewal of licenses. But I think the problem was the way it was positioned. It looked like it was going to be punitive, and it was also quite significant. The same thing to minimum tax and other tax measures. So minimum tax, in my view, is a good measure, but it is a bit high. 1%, and then not taking into consideration that sometimes when a business is at its initial stages, it actually is bleeding of cash and needs time to scale up. So yeah, there were other options, and I think the aspect of more inclusivity, trying to come up with taxes that would be more, broader and softer for the common mwananchi. Like if minimum tax was 0.25%, I think that would be a good measure.
Now, the bill also proposes now an increase in the cost of loans, and we're talking about the changes. Where to expect the changes? The Banking Act is going to be expecting that particular change with the increase in the cost of loans of up to 20%.
Yeah. So again, just to go back, we're also coming out of an interesting period where a lot of businesses had been, stifled by COVID. There was no consumption, or consumption was limited just to basic needs. The industry had almost come to, manufacturing had come to a standstill, a lot of layoffs. So it's just going to increase the cost of doing business. It's going to exacerbate the recovery period such that you find that, some of these fees are unavoidable. So it's just going to increase the cost of doing business. It's going to mean loans will become more expensive or dearer, and therefore, at the end of the day, the final consumer is going to end up having to suffer for some of those measures that are being introduced. But again, it's a way of the Revenue Authority trying to increase the tax base. But again, I think this is a measure that could have been postponed for a later period of time, especially during these times when we're trying to recover from COVID, the impact of COVID. Yeah.
So how do you think the banking sector is going to react to this? Are they going to be opening up to borrow more? Are they going to start, is it going to give impetus to the banking sector to...
I think it's going to, but I think it's going to affect, because it's going to affect the uptake of loans, because loans then now become more expensive. And therefore, I think what's going to happen is that the business men and women who want to go and take loan, businesses are going to find it more costly.
So then now, what does this mean? When we know when demand is diminished, we get other options. Is this now an opportunity for micro lenders to come into play?
Yes.
Suckers, so to speak.
Yes. And I think that is probably where, when formal lending becomes expensive, then you find the other smaller players then, get their niche. They're able to cut their niche. So from a macro point of view, you'd expect that the smaller lenders then will come in to bridge the gap. And it's only recently that we've also seen that they're also facing challenges. So there needs to be a balance. And especially now that we are trying to recover from this period where businesses have really suffered huge losses because of the pandemic.
Over the few years, we've been seeing government trying to regulate betting and gaming. Now, we are having a reintroduction of a betting tax that had been thrown out in the last financial year, that is 2020-2021. What impact of the reintroduction? What impact will it have on betting and gaming?
So just to go back a bit on the betting, just like every other, like you said, sin tax. I think this was when betting became vibrant 2-3 years ago. You found there was a lot of focus on the betting industry. And what happened is that a lot of players in this industry had been accused of coming up with structures that were denying Kenya needed revenue. And so the government has been continuously trying to look for ways of increasing collections from this particular sector. But this, unfortunately, is a tax that will ultimately affect the person who is wagering, the person who is betting. So, which therefore means that, in effect, it's going to make it more pricier for me to bet if I bet, and therefore the uptake of betting may go down in an industry also that we have seen has started, contracting as opposed to a few years back when it was a major player or there was a lot of betting activity going on. So we do expect that the government is going to raise additional revenue. But that industry is not what it was 2-3 years ago.
So what I'm hearing is that people have changed tact when it comes to gaming and betting. So we might not quite rake in as much as we'd want to. Oh, okay. We're setting ourselves up for a disappointment. That's what I'm hearing. Now, further the bill, we're looking at the tax regimes, or rather the tax changes that we're expecting in the finance bill. There's a proposal to actually introduce 10% duty on operations relating oil, gas, and mining. Kenya has been really expectant to get even, some monies, rather returns and investment from the early oil pilot scheme. Not yet, but here we are introducing 10% duty on operations relating to oil, gas, and mining.
So again, just to go back to the question and also the background that you've given. So it's an industry that we expected was going to do, especially with the discovery of oil. The government has also been coming up with initiatives to try and prospect for more oil, especially Indian Ocean. So overall, I would expect that it's going to, reduce the attractiveness of that sector to any prospective investors. So it's going to make that industry more expensive. for investors that would be looking to invest in mining and extraction.
Now, if we're talking about investors, then with this kind of proposal to increase 10% duty, what do you think? How will it impact on local investors who have been eyeing this niche and nascent subsector that is oil, gas, and mining? Because we have been seeing it's expatriate companies that have been prospecting for oil and such, and there's been a lot of conversation. Why don't we have our own local investors getting into this?
It makes it more expensive, and then even ultimately when you think about the end product, it also makes that end product more expensive. So it's a very capital intensive sector, and therefore the moment, and we don't have most of those equipment locally. So the moment you introduce higher duties, it just means that you're making the cost of production, the cost of investment in those activities more pricier.
Now, you mentioned when we began the widening the tax base to make it more inclusive, to ease the burden on the few who have been paying these taxes for years. Maybe make us understand when you say to widen the tax base. What does that really mean?
So if I take the example of minimum tax, for example, I think it's a good initiative, but which has been approached probably in a way that is not very popular with businesses. And the reason for that, just like I explained, you target industries, you target companies that in their initial stages don't have as much, they're trying to invest, they're trying to set up. So initially, when you set up a business, you'd expect that business would probably not turn into profitability until maybe after 2 or 3 years. Now, the moment you introduce a minimum tax and tell everyone that you must pay that minimum tax, then that means that I might be paying that minimum tax out of my initial capital. Now, when you make that tax significant, then immediately it then makes the businessmen and other players in the industry feel like you're actually stifling their the industry. So widening means come up with measures that would be deemed to be friendly to investors. So perhaps reducing this rate would have been a good thing. It's a good way of ensuring inclusivity, but again, I think it is the rate that is a bit high. It is the way it's being done, the way it's being implemented, that is it's wrong. I also mentioned that I would have expected that the tax measures such as the ones that had been introduced during the COVID time could also have been extended to this year and next year, so as to give people a good cushion to be able to contribute to the national cake. So inclusivity also means reduce taxes, respond to what is happening economically. Granted, the government needs money for operations, but at the same time, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that, we tend to be revolving around the same people who are being taxed. So giving them a little cushion can go a long way in ensuring that the tax pot then increases over time.
Now, from where you sit, Kuria, are we still going to be focused on the big four in this budget, or are these mega projects going to take a backseat?
Interesting question, especially considering that we are headed into an election year. So there are many aspects. I would hope that the government focuses on the big four agenda, because certainly there are some agendas there that are very critical. Universal health care is something that I would imagine we are all passionate about. Infrastructure as well, when you think about it, the pillar of education and so on. So I think that it would be important for the government to still prioritize, even though I think that as we draw closer to the end of the year, early next year, the focus will start shifting into other things, politics and so on.
With the history as we have, KRA has missed its targets, and more so, analysts have said, like including yourself, is likely not going to make it. So what other options are there for Treasury to actually raise this, or rather finance this proposed budget?
Widening the tax base, looking for measures that are popular. I know the government sometimes doesn't, especially when it comes to tax. They say tax is you'd rather not contribute it. everybody feels the pinch, but looking for a way of being inclusive, looking for a tax that people will be happy to pay, because it's not too punitive, would be a good thing. So one of the measures that perhaps could be looked at is to try and refine some of these proposals so that they then become more practical and implementable and felt by the business community as being friendly. Yeah.
Now, in parting, if you were given an opportunity, if you were the one seated on Kuria Tani's, the CS National Treasury's position, with just weeks to go or even a year, how would you, or rather how would you go about it to make the budget 2021, 2022, palatable for Wanjiku?
I think the key thing would be to try and come up with measures that would cushion the Mwananchi so that they then feel that the government is more inclusive. But at the same time, in widening the tax base, try and come up with measures, minimum tax, for example, which would be not too punitive to the business community. And of course, there are some low-lying fruits, like deal with the over-ballooning expenditure, government expenditure, try and deal with corruption decisively. All those measures, when put together, would work towards ensuring that the budget is then met. Yeah.
Very well said. We have been speaking to a tax and accounting expert, a partner at Kody Africa Limited Liability Partnership, Mr. John Kuria. Take home. Analysts such as himself and an expert says the tax burden ought to be distributed equitably amongst taxpayers. I'm Regina Manyara. You're watching Business Insight.